Have you ever asked yourself, can I become wiser? Not the academic kind of intelligence, not IQ on paper, but practical wisdom, the kind that keeps you grounded in chaos, helps you make the right decisions at the right time, and frees you from being ruled by emotions. We tend to think wisdom comes from books or experience, and that's partly true, but not the whole story. What changed my life wasn't a degree. It wasn't hard-earned lessons from failure. It was discovering an ancient philosophy, Stoicism. In this video, we'll explore 10 of the most powerful Stoic techniques, not just to sharpen your mind, but to build inner strength, break free from negative emotions, and step into a stronger version of yourself. 1. Turning change into a lesson. Change is an inevitable part of life. Whether we welcome it or not, it arrives. Silently, fiercely, unexpectedly, or over time. Some see change as a storm that tears everything apart, while others embrace it as a chance to be reborn. But those who have endured suffering, who have faced loss, who've stood at life's crossroads shrouded in fog, they know that change is not an enemy, but a teacher, a strict teacher, but a fair one, a teacher who doesn't speak in words, but in trials. And like all great teachers, it doesn't come to comfort you. It comes to make you grow. We tend to cling to the familiar, stable jobs, long-term relationships, comfortable routines. Familiarity gives us a sense of control, and control always feels better than uncertainty. But here lies the paradox. The very things that make us feel safe over time become the cage that stifles growth. When life becomes repetitive, the mind dulls, the soul shrinks, and adaptability, the essence of living wisdom, begins to wither. Meanwhile, change demands that we start again, see the world with new eyes, break old patterns, and face an unfamiliar reality. And in that process, we grow sharper, deeper, and more elusive. The Stoics never sought to escape change. They didn't cling to sameness, to feel secure. On the contrary, they trained their minds for the unexpected because they understood that everything outside us, our jobs, our loved ones, our reputation, even our health, can shift at any moment. And if your happiness is anchored to those things, then change will sweep you away like a wave. But if your happiness is rooted in adaptability, in the ability to extract wisdom from adversity, then you will remain steady, no matter how many times the wind changes direction. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Loss is nothing but change, and change is nature's delight." To many, these words sound like philosophical comfort. But if we practice them daily, not just read, but live them, then change, no matter how painful, becomes a part of our evolution, not the end of our story. Every time we lose something, a chance, a relationship, a dream, it is life inviting us to turn inward and rebuild. That is not failure, that is reformation. If you're going through a major change right now, take a deep breath, and instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" try asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" The answer won't come instantly, but if you're patient, honest, and brave enough to look closely, you'll discover that with every shift, a deeper wisdom within you awakens, and that is the true gift life is offering you. 2. Voluntarily choosing discomfort. We live in a world increasingly engineered for comfort. Food delivered to our doors, air conditioning running non-stop, technology shielding us from nearly all inconvenience. And there is nothing wrong with enjoying the gifts of modern civilization. But if we remain forever within the bubble of ease, the true danger isn't that our bodies weaken, but that our minds grow lazy, fragile, and terrified of anything beyond our control. The Stoics didn't seek pain, nor did they reject comfort, but they understood one vital truth: without friction, Steel cannot harden, and without discomfort, the will cannot grow strong. That's why they chose to step into discomfort deliberately, like a soldier training in times of peace, preparing for the realities of war. Picture someone who always avoids the cold. They keep the heat turned up, shower only in a hot way, and dodge anything that brings physical unease. There is nothing inherently wrong with that. But one day, if circumstances force them into the cold, a long journey, or a power outage in winter, the discomfort won't just strike their body but their psyche as well, because they've never trained their capacity to embrace joy. Meanwhile, someone who takes cold showers each morning doesn't do it because they embody it, but because they're teaching their brain to face discomfort, sending the body a message: we're still okay, even when things aren't pleasant. That is the spirit of a voluntary discomfort, a Stoic practice designed to forge resilience and inner strength. Seneca, one of the great Stoic thinkers, would deliberately live for days in poverty despite his wealth. He wore tattered clothes, ate the simplest food, and asked himself, "Is this what I feared?" In doing so, he severed his dependence on luxury and trained his mind to see that a good life doesn't require excess. When you choose discomfort, you reclaim power from the invisible fears: fear of hunger, of lack, of judgment, of not being enough, that quietly controls so many lives. The Stoics believed a strong will isn't born from theory, it's forged through the action. And no action is more powerful than deliberately placing yourself in the hardship. This doesn't have to be grand or dramatic. Sometimes it is walking 10 kilometers instead of taking a ride, eating plainly for 3 days, turning down a social invite to sit quietly with yourself, or attempting something you've long avoided out of fear of failure. What matters isn't the level of hardship, but the intention behind it. Every time you choose the harder path over the easy one, discomfort over avoidance, you're adding one more rep to the muscle of your will. In today's world, where nearly everything is a tap away, the one who chooses discomfort walks against the current, not ruled by fear, not enslaved by circumstance. And that is when true wisdom begins to take shape. Wisdom isn't merely knowing much. It's knowing how to govern yourself when life no longer goes your way. And there's no better way to learn that than by embracing discomfort while it's still a choice, before life forces it upon you without mercy. 3. Step back to see more clearly. In Stoic philosophy, one of the core principles for cultivating wisdom and self-mastery is stepping back, or what we might call intentional withdrawal. This does not mean avoiding responsibility or evading problems, but rather a strategic act of observation, reflection, and conscious adjustment. The Stoics recognize that when the mind is constantly swept up in work, emotions, conflict, and external stimuli, without time for introspection, it easily slips into autopilot, disconnected from one's deeper values. Stepping back restores inner balance, allowing us to see with greater perspective and less emotional distortion. It's a simple act, but one that yields lasting clarity, an essential trait of wisdom in the Stoic tradition. The idea of intentional withdrawal can be understood as creating space, both temporal and mental, for pausing, observing, and recentering oneself. It might mean a brief period each day, devoted solely to reflection. It could be an afternoon without a phone, a short trip to escape daily routines, or just a few minutes of stillness for journaling, meditation, or deep breathing. These moments serve as a pause button, pulling us out of reactive patterns and into conscious awareness, something Stoicism holds in the highest regard. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor and Stoic philosopher, embodied this mindset. Despite the weight of ruling a vast empire, He carved out time to write his thoughts and observations in what we now know as meditations, a form of inner dialogue. His journaling was not for public eyes, but a way to step back and reflect on his actions, thoughts, and emotions. Through this, he sharpened his self-awareness, a central pillar of Stoic intelligence. His practice offers a timeless suggestion. Time spent looking inward not only deepens self-understanding, but leads to wiser, more emotionally balanced decisions. Intentional withdrawal also protects the mind from being eroded by distraction. In today's world, we face a flood of information and pressure from our environment, jobs, social media, comparisons, and expectations. Without strategic pauses, we easily lose direction and react impulsively instead of acting deliberately. The Stoics understood that only in stillness can we truly see not just the problem, but the nature of the problem. This enables us to resist emotional traps like anger, anxiety, or fear, forces that cloud judgment and drive us away from reason. Moreover, stepping back cultivates non-judgmental observation, a vital skill for developing critical thinking and compassion. When we detach from roles, expectations, and ego, we gain the ability to approach situations with greater objectivity and kindness. Stoics believe that seeing the world without the distortion of self-interest leads to more grounded and wise response. This is especially powerful in conflict or high-stakes decisions, because rather than reacting with raw emotion, we respond with a mind tempered by silence. In essence, in Stoic thought, stepping back is not a sign of weakness or indecision, but a free strategy for escaping the trap of busyness and returning to inner clarity. It is in those quiet moments of observation that wisdom is born and strengthened. This is not a technique reserved for philosophers or rulers, but one accessible to anyone seeking self-mastery, deeper insight, and a life guided by intention rather than chaos. 4. Treat learning as a lifelong journey. Stoicism places wisdom at the heart of a well-lived life, one marked by purpose, clarity, and inner peace. However, wisdom in Stoic thought is not defined by academic knowledge, degrees, or intellectual titles. The kind of wisdom the Stoics pursued comes from observation, self-reflection, and practical application in everyday life. For this reason, they believe that learning never ends. There is no point in life at which one can say, "I know enough." Learning in the Stoic sense is a lifelong journey, where each day we live, each situation we encounter, and each person we meet becomes a lesson, if we are present enough to notice. The philosopher Epictetus once said, "Only the educated are free." He didn't mean that the well-read hold higher status, but rather that when we learn to observe ourselves, understand the world, and act with reason, we free ourselves from the grip of emotion, circumstance, and ego. This is a kind of inner freedom, the very freedom Stoics strive for, and to reach it, one must never stop learning. In this tradition, learning doesn't just happen through books. It happens in every moment we live. When we make a mistake, that's a chance to learn. When we patiently listen to another, that's learning. When we reflect on our actions and motives, that too is learning. What is distinct about Stoic learning is that it includes not only growth through success, but through hardship and error. To them, failure is not an endpoint, but an essential part of developing wisdom. Stoics examine how they act under pressure to understand themselves better, adjust their behavior, and strengthen self-control. That's why in daily life, they treat every experience, pleasant or difficult, as valuable material for growth. And the wise person is the one who can turn every situation into a lesson. In addition to learning from oneself, and life circumstance. Stoics emphasize learning from others, especially those who live with virtue, think clearly, and act with discernment. They believe that a strong environment, meaningful dialogue, and exposure to thoughtful individuals expand the mind and accelerate personal growth. Likewise, Stoics made reading a regular practice, not to memorize facts or showcase intellect, but to reflect, to test personal experience, and to find guidance for everyday action. Reading, to them, is not just about consumption. It is a dialogue with enduring ideas, a training ground for reason, and a way to reinforce one's guiding principles. Above all, Stoic learning is not passive. It requires initiative, the humility to admit what we don't yet know, the alertness to notice small lessons, and the long-term commitment to refine ourselves daily. No one becomes wise overnight. In Stoic philosophy, wisdom is the result of steady accumulation, where learning is not a phase, but a way of life. When Stoics speak of lifelong learning, they are not referring to stockpiling information, but to living with a spirit of constant inquiry, remaining open to truth, constantly testing our thinking, and inching ever closer to the essence of inner freedom. 5. Gratitude. Not when you have enough, but when you realize you already do. In Stoic philosophy, gratitude is not seen as a fleeting emotion or a social courtesy, but as a deliberate state of awareness with the power to transform one's mindset. The Stoics believe that when practiced regularly and mindfully, gratitude changes how we see the world, fostering clarity, emotional stability, and a more balanced form of wisdom. To them, gratitude is not merely about acknowledging the good. It's about learning to recognize value even in the ordinary, and sometimes the difficult, so we can cultivate a deeper, more mature perspective on life. According to Stoic thought, gratitude is directly tied to attention. A grateful person stops chasing what's missing and begins to notice what's already present. This trains the mind to observe, to live in the moment, and to step out of the illusion of lack, born from expectation. The Stoics emphasize that most human dissatisfaction doesn't come from having too little, but from failing to recognize how much we already have. Gratitude corrects this by highlighting the worth of small, often overlooked virtues that form the foundation of a good life, like health, tithing, friendship, and even the capacity to think and govern ourselves. The practice of gratitude in Stoicism isn't about idealizing or romanticizing life. On the contrary, it's rooted in realism and the discipline to see things as they are. Stoics did not deny the existence of pain, loss, or injustice, but they refused to let these things blind them to what still remained. They chose to focus on what was left, on even the smallest good, so they could preserve their emotional stability and protect the clarity of reason. In difficult times, gratitude becomes a mental shield, keeping us from being consumed by negativity and allowing us to think clearly through adversity. Marcus Aurelius, in his private writings, often expressed gratitude each morning for waking up, for breathing, for the ability to think, to love, and to act with purpose. This wasn't self-delusion, but a deliberate reminder of the value of existence and the foundational elements of a meaningful life. From this view, gratitude becomes a practice of intellect, not just an emotional response. Another important aspect of Stoic gratitude is the ability to appreciate adversity. Stoics are not only grateful for what is pleasant, but also for the hardships that shape them into stronger, calmer, and wiser individuals. Rather than resenting their wounds, they see them as valuable lessons into personal growth. This shift lifts them from the role of victim and places them in the position of agency, an essential step in cultivating true wisdom. Gratitude in adversity is not passive acceptance. It is a conscious choice to turn pain into perspective. In essence, for the Stoic, gratitude is not merely a feel-good emotion, but a tool for sharpening thought and deepening wisdom. It brings greater awareness of reality, reduces discontent, enhances self-mastery, and keeps the mind steady amid life's turbulence. Practicing gratitude daily, through reflection, writing, or simply pausing to acknowledge what is good, is one of the most practical and enduring ways to cultivate Stoic wisdom. 6. The power of mindful observation. In Stoicism, observation is not merely the act of registering images or information from the outside world. It is a conscious practice in which the mind is fully present and maintains neutrality toward all that unfolds. Stoics do not observe in order to judge, but to understand the true nature of things. This is the key distinction between a person living in awareness and one ruled by emotion. Mindful observation in Stoic thought is a fundamental tool for preserving rational wisdom because it allows one to see things as they are, unwarped by expectations, bias, or fear. The practice of mindful observation enables Stoics to create a vital space between perception and reaction. When we are not swept away by immediate emotion, we gain the clarity to assess situations with sound judgment and to respond deliberately rather than react impulsively. Observation is not limited to the external world, people, objects, circumstances, but turns inward as well, toward the subtle movements of emotion, thought, and inner conflict. Through this process, the practitioner learns to recognize what is happening without becoming what is happening. They can see anger rise without becoming anger, see fear emerge without letting fear dictate their actions. This is the core of self-mastery and one of the highest expressions of wisdom in Stoicism. Mindful observation also allows one to perceive the interconnectedness and underlying order of the world. When the mind is undisturbed by craving or aversion, it becomes easier to see that all events follow a natural order. Nothing happens entirely by chance. From this view, rather than resisting or complaining about circumstances, the Stoic learns to accept and adapt, drawing insight from every specific situation. Careful observation keeps them from missing the subtle messages life sends, perhaps a shift in a loved one's behavior, a persistent sense of unease, or a single comment that reveals something deeper. These signs, without full mental presence, are easily overlooked. Furthermore, mindful observation in Stoic life serves as a discipline for attention, helping one resist fragmentation in an overstimulated age. When we observe with full presence, even the smallest acts gain meaning. Taking a sip of water, walking down a hallway, listening to a sentence, all become opportunities to return to the present and gain deeper understanding of ourselves and the world. This mindset not only nourishes wisdom, but also enhances the quality of life. For when attention is sustained, presence becomes whole, and no moment is lost to unconscious drift. The power of mindful observation lies not in the gathering of data, but in the ability to see clearly, without being steered by passing emotions. It forms the foundation for maintaining reason amid uncertainty, making sound decisions, and living a life guided by intention. Mindful observation is not just a spiritual tool. It is a practical technique for cultivating deep and lasting wisdom. 7. Listening. Not to respond, but to understand. Listening is not merely a communication skill. It is an expression of self-control and wisdom. The Stoics saw listening as a discipline to cultivate humility, patience, and a deeper understanding of others. They did not listen to find points of rebuttal or to prepare clever responses, but to observe, to sense, and to learn. From every word, every silence, even from what remains unsaid. Listening, in the Stoic sense, is a practice of mental stillness, where the listener sets aside the urge to speak, resists the impulse to react, and becomes fully present to the unfolding moment. The philosopher Epictetus once emphasized that we were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we might listen more than we speak. This statement captures the Stoic mindset perfectly. They valued intentional silence over hurried replies. In this context, listening is a conscious act of restraining the need to steer the conversation and instead stepping into the other person's world. Through this, the Stoic trains the ability to observe not only words, but also emotions, expressions, and the motives beneath the surface. They do not rush to interpret or judge, but allow space for others to fully express themselves. This patience creates the possibility of deeper understanding and simultaneously reveals much about one's own internal reactions. Active listening is also a way to regulate emotion and restrain instinct, an ongoing pursuit for the Stoic. By listening without interruption, the practitioner learns to delay impulsiveness, quiet the ego, and momentarily suspend the need to assert their own viewpoint. It becomes a lesson in calm and objectivity, 2 pillars of rational wisdom. Listening also broadens the Stoics' perspective. They recognize that their personal view is always limited by their own experiences and beliefs. So listening to others becomes an opportunity to see the world through different lenses, deepening insight and enhancing discernment in action. Not only in theory, but in practice, Stoics viewed every conversation as a classroom and every person as a teacher. Whether it's a friend, a stranger, or someone with opposing views, there is always something to be learned if we are humble and alert enough to listen. This doesn't only foster empathy, it builds deeper connections, strengthens relationships, and reduces unnecessary conflict. In an age where everyone wants to speak, to be heard, and to prove themselves right, the one who truly listens becomes rare, and it is they who create meaningful impact in both life and community. Listening is not passive. It is a purposeful discipline for cultivating inner strength, understanding, and humility. When the mind is trained to listen without judgment, the practitioner not only learns more from others, but also creates a space where wisdom and true connection can take root. It is a simple technique with profound power in the Stoic path toward growth and right living. 8. Seeking silence to restore the mind. In Stoic philosophy, silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is a mental space essential for clear thought to emerge and evolve. Stoics do not seek silence to escape life, but as an ideal inner environment to return to themselves, to reflect on their thoughts, reactions, and the invisible forces driving their behavior. They recognize that in a world increasingly dominated by noise, both external and internal, the conscious pursuit of silence is a courageous, disciplined act to shield the intellect from distraction and clutter it cannot control. Stoics understand that the mind, when not regularly unburdened, becomes overwhelmed by information, emotion, and social pressure. When filled with noise, the mind loses the ability to distinguish what is essential from what is trivial, what is true from what is reactive. In such a state, wisdom cannot operate with clarity. That is why silence becomes a necessary condition for restoring independent thought, renewing foundational values, and preserving reason. Silence is not passivity. It is an active state in which the mind chooses stillness to observe more carefully, to reflect more deeply, and to respond with intention. Marcus Aurelius, both emperor and Stoic philosopher, often turned to silence at night to write down his thoughts, examine his actions, and reconnect with his principles. In those quiet moments, he not only shed the burdens of political duty, but also re-established the inner clarity needed to make sound decisions in a chaotic world. This practice reveals how Stoics used silence not as an escape from reality, but as a tool to approach it with a mind undisturbed. Moreover, silence creates the conditions for inner truth to be heard. When no longer distracted by external noise or the urge to react to everything, we begin to notice internal conflicts, repressed emotions, and unresolved thoughts. In that quiet, intuition awakens, self-awareness sharpens, and wisdom is refined. Stoics consider this an essential part of self-development, for only by understanding ourselves in silence can we engage meaningfully with the world around us. Seeking silence does not require isolation or withdrawal from society. It might be a few minutes each day away from screens, a walk without headphones, or simply sitting still, breathing, and observing thoughts without interference. These brief moments, when practiced consistently, become fertile ground for wisdom to grow, helping us stay centered amid life's rush and respond to the world consciously, not reflexively. 9. Engaging with diversity to expand the mind. In Stoic philosophy, intellectual maturity does not arise solely from inward reflection, but also from the ability to broaden one's perspective through engagement with others. However, not every social connection contributes to the cultivation of wisdom. The Stoics placed particular emphasis on engaging with diversity, intentionally seeking out, listening to, and learning from those with different views, backgrounds, lifestyles, and value systems. This isn't about seeking agreement. It's a way to train cognitive flexibility, helping one break free from the confines of personal bias and reduce the unconscious prejudices that form when we only surround ourselves with those who mirror us. Stoics understood that human nature inclines us toward groups that affirm our beliefs, offering comfort and validation. Yet, if we confine ourselves to this closed loop of thinking, we risk becoming rigid, diminishing our capacity to learn, and missing the opportunity to see the world from other vantage points. Diversity in communication, as seen through the Stoic lens, is not a quest for perfect harmony. It's a proving ground for examining assumptions, testing personal beliefs, and strengthening independent thought. When encountering opposing views, the Stoic does not react with judgment or argument, but instead uses the moment to question their own thinking. Why do I believe this? Or, is there a perspective I've never considered? Deliberately engaging with people from different cultures, with varied life experiences or unfamiliar ways of expressing themselves, helps the Stoic practitioner develop patience, tolerance, and a more comprehensive understanding of reality. This doesn't just enrich one's worldview. It sharpens emotional discipline in conversations, a key expression of emotional intelligence that helps preserve inner peace. Seneca encouraged building relationships with those who help us become better, not just morally, but intellectually, through the challenge of difference. Diverse engagement is also how the Stoic tests the real-world application of rational principles. Ideas like justice, empathy, humility, and self-control cease to be abstract ideals when they are practiced in relationship with others. In dialogue, especially with those unlike ourselves, these virtues are tested and refined. This not only strengthens one's ethical foundation, but also improves the ability to process information objectively, reduce bias, and make wiser decisions in both personal and public life. In summary, for the Stoic, engaging with diversity is not a matter of social nicety. It is a cognitive practice that frees the mind from self-imposed limits. By encountering varied perspectives, the practitioner not only expands their worldview, but also cultivates a resilient intellect, one that is not easily swayed by emotion or public pressure. This is one of the essential techniques for building inner strength and living in alignment with the Stoic ideal of reason. 10. Cultivating curiosity over judgment. In Stoic philosophy, the ability to assess things rightly is a core quality for maintaining wisdom and composure in life. However, Stoics understood that most judgments people make each day are not born of reason, but of emotional reflex, personal bias, or lack of understanding. For this reason, they deliberately cultivated an open mindset, one in which curiosity takes precedence over judgment, to create space for observation, inquiry, and a deeper grasp of reality before drawing any conclusions. This is not just a way of thinking, but a technique to slow down the mind's automatic responses and replace them with intentional, reasoned, and truthful replies. Stoics believe that premature judgment is one of the primary causes of the misunderstanding, conflict, and emotional turmoil in relationships and within the self. When we immediately label a person as bad, a situation as unjust, or an action as wrong, we bypass the chance to understand context, motive, and the complexity behind it. Curiosity, by contrast, invites us to ask questions instead of assert, to observe instead of conclude, and to widen our perspective, rather than shrink it within the boundaries of prejudice. Maintaining that curious stance helps the Stoic cultivate objectivity, a foundational quality for preserving rational clarity and inner peace. Instead of asking, "Why are they like that?" with an undertone of blame, the Stoic asks, "What am I missing about this situation? Am I seeing this through a personal lens? Or, if I were in their position, what would I do?" These questions aren't meant to excuse harmful behavior, but to approach the issue with greater depth, allowing for responses that are measured, fair, and constructive. Cultivating curiosity also allows the practitioner to examine their own thinking and assumptions, avoiding arrogance and self-deception, pitfalls that Stoic philosophers constantly warned against. In a world full of contrast and complexity, curiosity becomes a bridge between ideologies, lifestyles, and values. When the practitioner no longer rushes to label things as right or wrong, good or bad, they become open to richer experiences and learn from difference instead of rejecting it. This not only broadens perspective, but builds mental flexibility, enabling better adaptation to changing circumstances and reducing the likelihood of reactive negativity when faced with opposing beliefs. Such practice directly supports the development of practical wisdom, the kind of intelligence that lies not in accumulated knowledge, but in the ability to guide thought, emotion, and behavior in real-world situations. In summary, for the Stoic, cultivating curiosity over judgment is not merely a moral virtue, but an effective cognitive strategy for preserving reason and expanding understanding. When we ask questions instead of leaping to conclusions, we strengthen our capacity to pause, to remain lucid, and to continuously learn from life itself. This is one of the most essential techniques for developing resilient wisdom, avoiding extremes, and maintaining clarity amidst the complexity of modern life. When I first encountered Stoicism, the thing that changed me wasn't some grand philosophical insight. It was the small, simple, yet profoundly challenging practices embedded in everyday life. I realized that most of the time, I was living reactively, letting circumstances, other people, or fleeting emotions dictate how I behaved. But by slowly and consistently applying Stoic techniques, one at a time, I began to build space between stimulus and response. A pause long enough to think, to choose, to refrain from saying or doing something I'd later regret. Some mornings, I began with writing down 3 things I was grateful for, and I ended my day with a few short reflections. What emotion clouded my reason today? And could I have handled it better if I had been calmer? Those simple moments became a mental anchor, keeping me from spiraling into stress and confusion, as I had so often before. I also began learning to step voluntarily into discomfort, from staying silent during a conversation instead of arguing to prove a point, to facing failure without rushing to blame. Each time I did, I could feel myself training an inner muscle, the muscle of self-discipline and resilience. And that's what gradually strengthened a more grounded wisdom within me. Stoicism didn't make me perfect, but it made me more awake to how I live. And for me, that's the most important first step toward true freedom. If you're still here, I believe something within you is beginning to shift. Maybe it's the spark of a question, a sharper sense of awareness, or simply a deeper longing to take control of your life. These 10 Stoic techniques aren't meant to be memorized. They're meant to be lived. No one else can change your life for you, and no path to true wisdom begins without first turning inward. Start with something small. Pause before reacting in anger. Write a few lines each evening, or simply choose to listen before you respond. Each of those choices is a solid step toward inner freedom. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. And if you're ready to go further, I invite you to explore other videos on this channel, where we'll dive deeper into how Stoics confront fear, that silent force that holds back so many dreams. I'll see you in the next one.